for the first time.
Where about to start? Oh, crap. And then hide the.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Maestro webinar series. We're really excited for today's presentation. Again, my name is Leslie Rangel, and I'm the programs director here at Maestro. Before we get into the presentation, I just want to make you all aware of some of the upcoming events we have going on. This Friday, we'll have our Friday forecast with procurement opportunities, and we'll have Michael Bryant from TxDOT giving the presentation. That's Friday at 11 a.m. In April, we're going to have a jam-packed month. And so for all of these updates, please visit us at maestrocenter.org and view our calendar so you see what's coming up. We'll have programs lined up every Wednesday for sure. And we'll have our main events, one of our core programs, our construction conference that is virtual and free on April 29th and April 30th. So I hope to see you at some of those presentations. And today we're going to talk about taxes. There are a lot of questions about taxes on a normal year. And so last year was definitely not normal. And so there are a lot of questions that y'all sent our way. So we're going to address them today. It's my pleasure to introduce Sandy Guevara and Diego Bravo of Calvary Ferguson to give our presentation, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, good morning, everyone. We're really happy to be here. My name is Sandy Guevara, and I'm a tax manager here at Calvary Ferguson. And you know, we hope to be able to answer all the questions you have today. And yeah, we're really looking forward to this.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Diego Bravo. I'm a tax associate here at Calvary Ferguson. Like Sandy said, we're really happy to be here mainly because we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and we know exactly everything that goes through your mind. And I hope we can be a good resource to you by doing this presentation.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. One of the things we wanna ask is, as we go through the presentation, feel free to just ask additional questions in the chat. And once we get to the stopping point, we'll look at those questions and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Okay, so these are some of the general questions we received, and it talks about the questions are how to file the tax return if the payment protection program was received, how does the employee retention credit affect the return, and can we double dip? So we're going to dig into these questions one by one and kind of just give you like a brief description of what these are and how to file your tax return with these two. So on the PPP loan, the question was, how do we file our tax return if we had a PPP loan? And as many of you probably already know, back in 2020, when this first came out, when the CARES Act came out, the PPP loan was one of those reliefs that were given to people. And so a lot of people started applying for these loans and then submitted the application for these loans to be forgiven. And then the next question was, okay, so once that happens, how do I put this on my tax return? So on the federal tax return, the PPP loan that was received will not be taxable income, and you can actually still claim the deductions that were paid with those PPP loan proceeds. So what that means is whatever the money was used for, such as salaries and wages, commissions, things like that, you can still claim those as deductions on your PPP on your tax return. But the PPP loan that you received will not be taxable income. You'll report it as tax exempt income on the federal return. On the Texas franchise tax return, for those of you that have to file a Texas franchise return, as of right now, there's still legislation still being developed, and this might change. But as of right now, what this means for taxpayers that have to file a Texas franchise return is that those PPP proceeds are going to be counted as cancellation of debt income, meaning that's going to be adjusting the gross revenue for the 2020 tax return. So this will be income. This will be income added to your Texas franchise return. Again, For the federal tax return, that will not be taxable income. On the Texas franchise, it will be income, but this is still being developed. It could change in the future, but for now, this is the most current information we have. So then the next question we were asked was how to get the ERC. So ERC is the Employee Retention Credit. And just a quick explanation of what that was. So the ERC is basically a credit that's taken against the employer's share of the Social Security tax, with part of that being non-refundable and part of it being an actual refund, meaning actual cash. The way employers were getting this credit was by filing their Form 941s, beginning with the second quarter. So they will file these 941s, put their qualified wages, multiply them times 50%. And then they will subtract the employer's share of the Social Security tax. And then the remainder of that was an actual refund that the employer will receive. Now, for those people that were getting the PPP loan in 2020, they weren't able to claim the Employee Retention Credit. Well, that just recently changed. So you can actually go back and retroactively amend your 941s to get your Employee Retention Credit, even if you had the PPP loan. So you can actually go back to March 2020 and claim that ERC on top of receiving the PPP loan. Another thing to point out for 2021 is that the credit amount is now 70% of qualified wages versus 50% in 2020. The qualified wages could be as much as $7,000 per employee for 2021 versus $5,000 in 2020. The gross receipts deduction went from 50% to 20% in 2021, meaning in order for the credit to be claimed, the employer had to meet the gross receipts deduction, meaning the gross receipt decline was over 50% of the quarter in 2020, comparing it to the quarter in 2019. For 2021, the gross receipt deduction is now 20%. So meaning you're still going to compare that 2019 quarter to the 2021 quarter, but only at 20%. If the gross receipts were declined for 20%, then that qualifies. Eligible employers can also request an advance of the Employee Retention Credit by submitting Form 7200. So this is a way for 2021 to get that credit faster rather than waiting every quarter when you're submitting your Forms 941. The other question that was asked was, how does the ERC affect the tax return? So as we mentioned earlier, it used to be that if you had the PPP loan, you couldn't get the ERC. Now you can actually do that. You can retroactively go back and claim the ERC, even if you receive the PPP loan. However, the wages that were paid, using the PPP loan cannot be included on the ERC. On the tax return for the ERC, the wages the wages on the claim credit must be reduced by the amount of the credit. So what that means is that if you got $15,000 credit for the employee retention, you have to reduce the wages that you're going to report on your tax return by the amount of that credit. So do not include the ERC as income on your tax return. All you're doing is just subtracting the wages that you're going to report in your tax return by the amount of the credit you received. The reduction in wages may also impact Section 199A eligible wages for purposes of the 20% qualified business income QBI deduction. If the credit is claimed on the 2020 payroll taxes after the income tax return has been filed, an amended income tax return may be required to exclude those wages for the employee retention credit. So let's say that you've already filed your 2020 tax return, but then now that you know that you can go back and claim the ERC, you decide to do that and you get the ERC, what you're gonna have to do is amend your 2020 return to reduce your wages by the amount of the credit you received. So it's important that you do that if you've already filed your 2020 tax return and you want to go back and get the employee retention credit.
Yes, and then something to consider is if you have a S corporation or partnership where different people, different shareholders or partners are going to be receiving a K1, well, this K1 is also going to be amended, and therefore their personal return will be amended as well. So that's something that you'll have to think about and see if it's worth it. Now, we believe it's worth it because, as one of our senior managers here said, is if you refund me $100,000, I'd rather pay taxes on that $100,000 because it's basically just free money, right? So just something to think about.
So, and then the last question we were asked about this, the PPP loan and the ERC, is if you can double dip. And as I mentioned earlier, if there were wages that were used paying PPP, that were paid using the PPP proceeds, those wages can't qualify for the earned income credit. So keep in mind that the wages that were paid with the PPP cannot be included on the ERC. Wages for this credit don't include wages for which the employer received a tax credit for paid sick and family leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, CARES Act. Wages counted for this credit can't be counted for the credit for paid family and medical leave under Section 45S of the IRC. And employees are not counted for this credit if the employer is allowed a work opportunity tax credit under Section 51 of the Internal Revenue Code or the employee. So again, keep in mind, to answer the question, you really can't double dip. You cannot use the wages that were paid with PPP loan to claim the employee retention credit. And then on the next slide, we're just gonna show you a chart of what the original rules were for the ERC versus what they are now. So you'll see the time period for eligibility for 2020 was March 13, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. As of 2021, that get extended through June 30, 2021. The condition whereby employer was required to fully or partially suspend business operation because of a government issued order. That was part of one of the requirements in 2020, and it's still the same for 2021. The gross receipts condition for 2020. So in 2020, as we mentioned earlier, that company had to experience a significant decline in gross receipts. Significant decline is basically a 50% reduction in gross receipt when you're comparing that calendar quarter for 2020 to the respective calendar quarter in 2019. The gross receipts for 2021, however, now employers are eligible for a quarter if those gross receipts in that quarter are less than 80% of the gross receipts in the same calendar quarter for 2019. So that's what we're talking about, that 20%. So the employer's gross receipts for the immediately preceding quarter are less than 80% of its gross receipts for the corresponding calendar quarter of 2019. So for 2021, now it's a 20%, but you're still comparing that 2021 quarter to 2019. The large employer rules, when a company had more than 100 employees, the qualified wages that were going to be used for this credit had to be for employees that were not providing services because the employer had satisfied the business suspension condition or the gross receipt condition that we mentioned above. For small employers, the wages are qualified wages regardless of whether the employee continued to provide service, so long as either the business suspension or the gross receipts condition was satisfied. Now for 2021, the large employer increased to more than 500 employees. So it's still the same rules, but large employer now means more than 500 employees. And then on the next page, we talk about the maximum allowable credit for 2020, that was $5,000. For 2021, that's $14,000. The credit calculation, this is a very simple explanation. It's 50% of the qualified wages paid to the employees per quarter, limited to 10% in qualified wages paid during the entire period from March to December. And that's for 2020. For 2021, that increased to 70%, and it's limited to 10,000 paid during the first and second quarter, with a maximum credit of 14,000. There's another different calculation, a new worksheet when you're filing your 941, where you calculate the non-refundable and refundable piece of the employee retention credit. It's a very extensive worksheet that needs to be filed. The PPP loan, in 2020, as we mentioned earlier, companies that received the PPP loan weren't able to claim the credit. But as of 2021, they're able to do that, and they can do that retroactively. They can go back and claim the credit even if they got the PPP loan. But remember, the wages that were paid with the PPP loan cannot be qualified wages to claim the ERC. And then the types of businesses, just in 2020, that was not available for federal, state, and local government employers. But for 2021, the new change is that it is available to government employers described in IRC section 501c1 as exempt from tax under IRC section 501a. And then the next chart that we're going to show is just a comparison of employee retention credit versus PPP loan. Now, keep in mind that employee retention credits for the 2021. So ERC reported on confidential payroll reports. PPP is publicly viewable. For the ERC, there's no borrower application, no forgiveness application. For the PPP, there's multiple applications required. Bank and small business administration approval are required for the loan receipt and the forgiveness receipt. The benefit amount for employee retention credit is $7,000 for 2021, $5,000 for 2020. For the PPP loan, it's 2.5 months of the payroll. Employer size for the employee retention credit, it's available to all employer sizes. The PPP loan is only available for employers with less than 300 employees. The revenue test for the ERC is 20% gross receipts deduction in 2021, 50% gross receipt deduction in 2020. For the PPP loan, it's 25% quarterly gross receipt deduction comparing 2020 to 2019. There are no funds restriction for the ERC. For the PPP loan, you have to use it on qualified expenses. Limits on highly compensated, there are none for employee retention credit. For the PPP, it's limited to $100,000 annualized wage. Benefits for owner's compensation. It's not available for owner's payroll under the ERC, but it is for the PPP loan. And we just put on the bottom our company, like for the ERC, what you have to know is that it's determining your qualification requires more than just knowing the general rules. So you really have to go like step by step, look at what you've already filed, look at what you might have to amend in terms of whether it's your tax return or your Form 941s. And it all has to come down to what's more beneficial to do, right? If you didn't get the ERC, is it worth you going back? And as Diego mentioned earlier, most of the time it is, because you'll get a refund. You can get a refund by getting the ERC. The downside to that is that, getting that refund means you reduce your wages and thus you increase your taxable income. So you're basically paying taxes on that refund that you received. And that's what we have so far on the questions that were asked about the ERC and the PPP. If anyone has posted anything on the chat so far, if anyone has any other questions on the ERC or the PPP, if you want to put it in the chat or if you want to speak, feel free to do so before we jump into the next section.
Yeah, and also it's important to remember that most of these resources, including these type of charts, can be found in our website, ecalbertoferguson.com. We publish a lot of articles and very useful information very often. So we welcome you to use our website and then take a look at what we have. As of now, there's no questions regarding ERC and or PPP loan. We're going to ask, they're asking if we're going to be providing the slides, unless they say yes. So
yes, absolutely. And the reason why, yes, we want to do that, and that's why we put that link on the bottom. That way you guys can go. I mean, we've published a lot of different articles since the start of the pandemic, and when the CARES Act came out, everything that has changed for both the ERC, the PPP, and other relief acts that have been issued. So Yes, absolutely. We'll provide the slides and you're welcome to go to our website. Like I said, there are many articles out there that are very helpful and instructions on what to do next. So.
Also, you are more than welcome to contact us because like Sandy said, everybody has different situations that we'll need to analyze depending on the type of business, if you qualify or not, or how can you qualify. So feel free to do that as well. We'll be providing our information in the chat, including the website, our emails.
So if no one has any more questions about this, we'll jump into the next set of questions that we received. And these are more focused on individuals. But if at any time something comes up and you want to ask about it, and we can always go back to the ERC or the PPP loan. So we're going to jump into the specific questions and I'm going to let Diego.
Right, thank you. So for the first question that we received is, when submitting write-offs for business items that I have purchased for each business, is it best to keep them separate? The short answer is yes. The reason why is the IRS, wants you to separate personal and business all the time, especially if you have two businesses, right? So in this case, it seems like there's a couple of businesses at least. So yeah, the IRS is expecting you to keep it separate. That includes income, expenses, and depending on the type of your business, meaning if it's incorporated or sole proprietor or whatnot, it will be also important to have even different bank accounts. So just to clarify, the answer is yes for number one. For number two, we see this very often, especially because obviously, we want to treat our clients well when you're in business, and sometimes you give them gifts, like in Christmas or whatever season, or just because you want to appreciate them doing business with you. So the question was, we're giving a gift to my clients after a real estate closing. Is there a dollar amount I must keep in order to write the whole gift up? Well, the answer for the I must keep, it's no, because I think what you must be keeping is the receipt. But the other answer regarding the gift, yeah, you can give gifts to the clients. However, the limit is $25 per client per year. So I know it's not significant. However, there's some rules that talked about, for instance, if you give a gift that it's worth less than $4, and if you give 100 of them, then that's fine. Also, if you were to give a gift that has your business name or logo, or even your name engraved on it, then you're able to take 100% of that, because that could also be considered as advertising. So that's that for number two. For number three, when donating items from our household, how much can we donate on each tax receipt without us having to detail each item donated? Or if we give details, what are they looking for when we break each item down? So the IRS says that if you were to give a cash contribution, the limit without you having records, it's $250. If you were to give more, then you will need to be providing a donation receipt from this nonprofit organization. Now, when we talk about household goods, the non-cash, which is we consider a non-cash contribution, the limit will be $500. If you were to contribute more than $500, then you will need to add an additional tax form. And on this tax form, you'll be reporting who do you give it to, their address, and the fair market value of those, in this case, household items. For number four, I have a SUV Outback, or a Subaru Outback, that I use for my business, and the lease will be up in November. Is it best to lease again or purchase for a write-off? And I heard if I keep track of my mileage for 3 straight months, I can use that for the rest of the year. Is that correct? Well, we have different questions here. So the first question is, I use my car for the business. Well, you have to think about, is it 100% business use, or is it what percentage is it, right? The rule here says that unless it's 100% business use, then you will be able to write off the expense of that vehicle. However, though, to be able to write off the cost of it, it will need to be a heavy weight vehicle, most likely an SUV, and the rule is it has to weigh over 6,000 pounds. Now, if you were to have a car that it's not that heavy, then the options you have is to be able to deduct the actual expenses of the car, meaning gas, repairs, maintenance, and the other option is mileage, right? So 90% of the time, our clients take the mileage because it's easier, because they have a log, they keep track of it. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be collecting all these hundreds of receipts regarding tires and oil change. So you just take the mileage. And like I said, 90% of the time is more beneficial. Now, regarding that question of the 3 straight months, well, the IRS says, sure, if you are able to prove that you drove the same amount of distance for 3 straight months, and that's something that you do during the year regularly, sure, you may be able to do that as long as it's reasonable, right? Now, we always recommend our clients to just keep track of it for the whole year. There's many apps out there. Even you can just keep an Excel file. It can be a sheet of paper with your handwriting on it, just saying, from point A, from point B, this is how much I drove. Now, you have to take into consideration the commuter miles, right? That sometimes it's not, they don't qualify as business miles. Number 5, when taking my clients out for a meal and they order wine, is that tax deductible? Is the tip tax deductible? Short questions is yes for both. Now we have to be cautious regarding entertainment. You know, we go out with a client and we go to dinner, but then after that we go do something else other than a meal, like for instance taking up for a sports game or for to the club even. You know, all of those will be considered entertainment, so they are not deductible. It's important to remember that the meal has to be business related. So sometimes the client could be our friend and we go out and eat and we just have friendly conversations, then that would not apply when it comes to the meals deduction. These were the specific questions that we received. You know, if you guys have any additional questions you want to ask, you know, you can take this opportunity to do so. If not, you know, we can just sit tight and wait if any of you guys want to ask away. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. It could be regarding PPP, ERC, or even some of these specific questions.
And here's our information, and as Leslie already mentioned, she'll provide the slides, but here's our information. If you guys have any questions, like if something comes up later on, feel free to email us. My email is there, Diego's is there, and also on the right, you'll see Kyle is one of our tax senior managers in Houston, and he's focused on the PPP or the ERC. So before we came to do this presentation, we talked to him, and he said he's more than welcome to, you know, answer an email or get on a phone call if you have specific questions about your business in relating to the PPP or the ERC. So his information is also there. I guess, again, he's our expert on PPP or ERC, so feel free to reach out to him as well.
Okay, are there any questions? I know, so when we were working with, in October, November, we were doing the Bexar County Strong Grant, and a lot of these businesses were applying for grants. And a lot of the requirements were requiring their tax statements. And a lot of these businesses, here we go. This is exactly where I was going, Shauna, yes. For sole proprietorship, she only has one account for expenses and income. Would it qualify as salary and expenses? And so that was kind of what the question I had, right? Because we had so many of these small businesses who didn't have separate accounts for their business and for their their personal taxes that they were filing. And so how does that, what are the effects? Should they have separate ones? I know for the qualification for the grant purposes, they did need separate accounts. And so can you just talk a little bit about that?
So the question was, yeah, I only have, she's a sole proprietor. It says, I only have one account for expenses and income. Would it qualify as salary and expenses?
So when you're talking about account, do you mean are you saying you just put income and you put the total income regardless of what type of income it is? And then you have a line for expenses and it has all the expenses, meaning that can include wages, office supplies, utilities, rent, all of these things. So it's just one expense labeled expense, and that includes all of the different types of expenses for the year. Is that what we're saying?
For this PPP purpose and ERC, sure. So it seems like are you netting the income and expenses and just coming out with one number? It's just one account.
Is it a bank
Is it a bank account or just like one accounting? One bank account.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I think that, are you keeping a set of books? Like, are you keeping, meaning, whether it's in QuickBooks, Excel, or whatever?
yeah, she's got a set of books.
Okay.
She only has one bank account and she's got an Excel. That's what she needs. Right?
Yes.
There's no need to separate anything.
And for the ERC, what really matters is that you're filing those forms 941s, because that's where you're going to get your credit. So for the employee retention credit, in order to file, you're gonna need the form 941 that you file quarterly for your payroll taxes.
Did that answer your question? Yes, thank you. Oh, thank you. We are glad to be able to help you. How about PPP? Well, for the PPP, when you apply for forgiveness, it's basically an application that you do yourself and you fill out the blanks and you say, how much you spend on wages and how much you spend on other operational expenses. And it is important to remember that 75% of that money spent had it been spent on payroll, right? If not, then it's not going to be forgiven for that for that amount that was not used for that. So what's going to happen is after you do this application, the SBA is going to ask you for additional information, and that will include financial statements, that would include 941s that you filed with the IRS for payroll purposes. So the short answer to your question is you can just have one bank account, and then whenever the SBA asks for additional information, you just provide that specific set of accounts, meaning accounting accounts, depending on what you hit accounting wise.
The only reason why that might be suggested is because it makes it easier to quickly, especially when you're applying for the PPP loan forgiveness, it makes it easier to identify, what the PPP loan, the proceeds were used to pay, and it allows it to quickly identify which expenses were paid using the PPP proceeds, and then it also simplifies the PPP loan forgiveness process. So it's just a way to make it simpler and easier to identify, what those funds were used for. But if you have the same bank account, I would recommend, especially if you're using QuickBooks, just be very specific when you were doing your payroll and paying using the PPP loans, that you're very detailed on, explaining that was, that payroll was specifically paid using the PPP proceeds. It just makes it easier to have separate accounts for the PPP, especially when you're going to go back to the lender to apply for the PPP loan forgiveness.
Okay, we got 3 questions. It's a follow-up question. She says, Excel is only for record purposes. I do not have to move money around to pay myself. So we have to remember, when it comes to sole proprietors, you are not necessarily required to pay yourself. You can just take a member's draw. So on that Excel that you have, you will just have to mark what portion of what amount of money you moved out of the business to pay yourself personally. So the short question will be yes, but you just have to make sure it's recorded. You know, I took out this money from the business to pay myself. The other question is, can you quickly review what PPP funds can be used for?
Yes, absolutely. And we actually had a slide on that, but we thought it was a little too much, so we decided to remove it. But yeah, so you know, you can use the PPP loan. Now it's use them to what you can use them to pay. You can use them for payroll costs such as wages, salaries, commissions, healthcare benefits. Keep in mind that for 2020, the cash compensation is limited to $100,000 per employee. Payments of interest on any covered mortgage obligations, payments of any covered rent obligations, payments of any covered utility payments. Now, when you're talking about the loan forgiveness, it applies for the same things. The only thing that you can't count towards the loan forgiveness is interest on any obligations that were incurred before February 15, 2020. So you can use the PPP loan proceeds to pay any interest on any other debt obligations that were incurred before February 15, 2020, but for the loan forgiveness, you can't count that. But yeah, for the most part, it's any payroll costs, wages, salaries, commissions, benefits, payments of interest on any covered mortgage obligations, rent obligations, and utility payments. And just be very specific, especially, you know, when you're going to the lender and applying for that. And then more specifically, when you want to apply for the loan forgiveness, you have to be able to, you know, be detailed and be able to identify exactly what those proceeds were used for.
Right.
Because not everything, even if you use some of that money to pay some things, not all of those things will qualify to for the loan forgiveness.
Yeah, otherwise you will be in the news because you purchased a Lamborghini with the funds.
And keep in mind also that at least 60% of those PPP loan proceeds has to be used for payroll, and no more than 25% can be used on other than payroll. So it's important that you know, at least 60% has to be used on payroll costs, and no more than 25 can be used on non-payroll items.
Next question that we have is what business have to file corporate taxes?
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Short answer, when we talk about corporate taxes, would be a C corporation.
Or an S corporation.
Now, we also have pass-through entities, which are S corporation and partnerships. And that could also be considered as a corporate tax return. So that's the main three that that we have to be filing taxes as corporate taxes. Thank you for the questions, by the way.
We have another question on our Q&A feature of Zoom from Dulce McElroy. With so many changes this past year, I did not get my own paycheck monthly. What to do when filing for taxes? And she has a small business.
It's a sole proprietor?
I believe so. Dulce, can you clarify that for us?
If that's the case, it kind of goes back to the question we received about moving money around to pay myself. It will be related to that. Now, if you have a sole proprietor and you file the return on your personal tax return, then it would be good to have a clean set of books, meaning, like we said, identifying what was the amount that you pay yourself. But when it comes to taxes, since it's reported on your personal return, as long as you have that number, you should be fine.
Yeah, so if you're talking about, filing your own 1040, which would include a Schedule C, which is where you report your business income, then yeah, you will show it as income on your 1040, meaning your salaries, but then you will show it as an expense on the business. But I would suggest that you go back and try to, if you're planning on paying yourself now, try and go back and do a set of, tracking of all the amounts that you're going to pay yourself. Because the least you want is for the IRS to audit your tax return for something as simple as that. And I know there have been a lot of different changes, and for many businesses, it was very difficult, especially if you had to remain closed to keep track of all of that. So if there's a way you can try to go back and recount all of that, we would suggest that you do that.
Okay.
Now, also just to add on that, you don't necessarily need to pay yourself. You just can leave the money in the business and use it for business purposes. And so if you didn't pay yourself, then there's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to sole proprietorship, right?
Okay, any other questions? Again, we will be providing these slides, and like Sandy and Diego mentioned, if you'd like more information on PPP, like a little 15-20 minute consultation, you can reach out to their tax senior manager, Kyle. And that's on the screen right now with his contact information.
Oh, and one quick thing to know, for those of you that apply for the PPP loan, or even if you haven't, there is a second round of PPP, and the deadline to submit that is March 31st. So basically 6-7 more days. So you have a week. So if you're planning on applying for the second round of PPP loan, get with your lender as soon as possible, because it does take a couple of days for that to be processed, and the deadline is March 31st.
That's right. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and drop this survey in the chat for those of you attending. Maestro is really trying to focus our programming on needs-based assessments, meaning we want to know what it is that you need for your business to succeed. And so I've dropped the link in for you to fill out that survey and just tell us about some of your experiences and what you want to see in programming moving forward. There's actually one more question from Michelle Bratton. What is the time frame that the PPP has to be used? And I'm not sure, Sandy or Deco, if y'all know.
Yeah, so there's this thing called the cover period. So it's the 24-week period beginning on when the PPP loan was disbursed to for the borrower. So it's a 24-week period, but some people can also elect to use an 8-week period as well. Keep in mind though that, especially when you get the PPP loan, if you want the loan to be forgiven, you have to submit the required documentation to your lender. And normally you have until the maturity of the loan, or but after the 10th month after 10 months after the end of the cover period, that's when you start making payments. So keep that in mind as well. So, once you get the loan, if you want to get forgiveness, you want to do it not right away, but as soon after the cover period ends, which is, like I said, normally it's 24-week period, but some employers choose 8-week period.
Okay, great. And if you are a hospitality business, the city of San Antonio has opened up applications for a possible grant. And the deadline to submit that application is Monday, April 5th at 11 p.m. And you can find more about that on our newsletter. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please send us your email so we can sign you up so that you can be kept in the loop on any possible grant opportunities from our partner resources. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. This concludes our Maestro webinar series. I want to thank Sandy and Diego for taking the time to come and speak to our Maestro Familia and answer any questions that y'all had. It was so enlightening, and thank you, because this is, way over. I've worked with Sandy doing volunteer income tax assistance, and so she is always our go-to expert. So thank you all again for being here, and have a great rest of your day. If you're tuning in for our Spanish version, we will start at noon.
Thank you all.
Okay. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Leslie Rangel y soy la directora de programas de Maestro. Hoy tenemos una presentación fascinante sobre lo que necesita para presentar sus impuestos. Presentará Diego Bravo y Sandy Guevara de Ppp Ferguson. Tenga en cuenta que responderemos a sus preguntas al final de la presentación. Y con eso empezaremos.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos y muchas gracias por tenernos y por haber, entrado a esta pequeña presentación. Mi nombre es Sandy Guevara y como Leslie ya lo mencionó, soy una contadora en Ppp Ferguson, una compañía aquí en San Antonio.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, buenos días, o tardes ya. Mi nombre es Diego Bravo. Y también parte de Ppp Ferguson. Estamos contentos de estar aquí con ustedes el día de hoy. Espero esta presentación les sea de ayuda. Y lo más importante, ya que para nosotros es muy importante ayudarle a gente como ustedes que tienen sus propios negocios y siempre están buscando diferentes recursos y oportunidades para crecer y para operar de una mejor forma.
Vamos a empezar con ciertas preguntas que nos fueron enviadas días atrás. Y después de ahí vamos a llegar a un punto en el que vamos a parar, y si alguien tiene alguna otra pregunta, por favor, siéntase libre de ponerlo en el chat o al final de la presentación. Claro que si quiere hablar y hacer alguna pregunta, que clarifiquemos algo o que demos más detalles de algo, trataremos lo mejor para poder hacer eso. Las preguntas recibidas que nos mandaron fueron: ¿cuál es el efecto fiscal en la declaración anual si se recibió el préstamo de PPP, el programa de protección de cheques de pago? ¿Y cuál es el efecto fiscal en la declaración anual si se recibió el crédito ERC, el crédito por retención de empleados? Y si se puede aplicar el préstamo de PPP y el crédito de ERC. Vamos a dar una por una y explicar más o menos cómo es esto. Entonces, han habido demasiados cambios y como ustedes ya saben, durante el 2020 salió el CARES Act y ha habido demasiados cambios, demasiadas oportunidades para negocios, para que no tengan que cerrar sus negocios y puedan seguir pagando a sus empleados. Uno de esos fue el PPP. Entonces, para una persona que recibió ese préstamo durante el 2020, ese préstamo se usó para diferentes cosas, como salarios y cosas así. Y ahora la pregunta es, ¿cómo voy a reportar eso en mis impuestos? ¿Cómo se reporta eso en mi declaración federal? Entonces, los fondos recibidos del préstamo de PPP no serán gravables de impuestos. se podrán deducir los gastos que se pagaron con los fondos recibidos del préstamo PPP y el monto del préstamo se reporta como ingreso exento de impuestos. Lo que esto significa es que el dinero que se recibió del PPP no va a ser sujeto a impuestos, no va a tener que pagar impuestos con eso. Y los costos que se pagaron usando el préstamo de PPP, aún así se van a poder deducir en su declaración federal. El monto se va como quiera reportar en su declaración federal, pero va a ser exenta de impuestos. No se puede decir lo mismo para la declaración estatal en Texas. Para los que tienen que declarar impuestos en Texas, si el préstamo fue perdonado, será considerado como una cancelación de deuda, lo cual lo convierte a un ingreso gravable de impuestos. La legislación aún no se finaliza y existen excepciones para ciertas personas físicas y morales según el IRC del 2017. Entonces, para la declaración federal, lo que se recibió del PPP no va a ser sujeto a impuestos. Desafortunadamente, a lo que se sabe ahorita, aunque la legislación no ha sido finalizada, para la declaración estatal de Texas, eso va a ser contado como ingresos y va a ser gravable de impuestos. La siguiente pregunta fue acerca del ERC. ¿Cómo se va a reportar eso en la declaración? El ERC es un crédito que se utiliza para compensar los pagos del seguro social y retenciones requeridas por parte de los empleadores. Los empleadores deben reportar esos salarios calificados totales y los costos del seguro de salud relacionados a cada trimestre en sus declaraciones de impuestos trimestrales del empleo. Eso significa las formas 941. Si usted es un empleador que tiene que hacer esas formas cada trimestre, ahí es donde se reporta ese crédito. Y ese crédito lo que hace es se ponen los salarios que estuvieron durante el año, se multiplica por 50% para el 2020. Después se quita la cantidad que no es reembolsable del seguro social pagada por el empleador y lo que resta es el reembolso, el crédito reembolsable al empleador. Uno de los cambios que hubo en el 2021 es de que el monto de crédito ahora es del 70% de salarios calificados en vez del 50% como lo fue en el 2020. Y puede ser hasta de $7,000 por empleado por trimestre y en el 2020 esto era $5,000. Una deducción de ingresos de 50% al 20% en el 2021. Lo que eso significa es que uno de los requisitos para poder agarrar este crédito es que tenía que tener una reducción de ingresos del 50% en el 2020. Ahora eso ha cambiado para el 2021 a que solo se necesita tener una reducción de ingresos de 20%, lo cual significa que tiene que comparar el trimestre del 2020 al trimestre del 2019 y para el 2020, si la reducción de ingresos fue del 50% o más, ese es uno de los requisitos. En el 2021 va a comparar el trimestre del 2021 al trimestre como quiera del 2019 y si la reducción de ingresos fue al menos 20%, es uno de los requisitos que ha cumplido. Los empleadores calificados pueden pedir un adelanto de este crédito. Hay una forma 7200, que se puede usar para declarar, para agarrar un adelanto de este crédito. En vez de esperarse cada trimestre cuando usted haga sus formas 941, puede hacer la forma 7200 y agarrar de adelanto todo ese crédito. Para los que recibieron el PPP durante el 2020, no podían reclamar el ERC, pero esto ya cambió este año y se puede hacer retroactivo hasta marzo de 2020. Entonces vamos a decir que usted agarró el préstamo del PPP y por sí mismo no pudo aplicar para recibir el crédito de retención de empleados. Entonces ahora puede ir a amendar esas formas 941 para poder agarrar ese crédito. Es uno de los cambios en 2021 que usted puede hacer en las formas 941 del 2020. La otra pregunta que nos hicieron fue que si se podía usar el crédito de retención de empleados y el PPP. Antes de llegar a eso, hay que decir que los salarios reportados deberán ser restados de la cantidad del crédito recibido. Entonces, si usted recibió el crédito o decide amendar sus 941 para recibir el crédito, tiene que tener en consideración que la cantidad de crédito que reciba, eso va a tener que ser restado de los salarios que usted reporte en su declaración federal. No es considerado como un ingreso ni la porción reembolsable ni la porción que no es reembolsable, pero sí va a tener que usar, vamos a decir que la cantidad de crédito que recibió fueron $15,000. Entonces, en su declaración federal, los salarios, usted los va a tener que restar esos $15,000 de sus salarios. La reducción de salarios también puede afectar la deducción de el Qualified Business Income, que es relacionada a los salarios utilizados para su cálculo. Si usted por alguna razón reclamó el crédito después de haber hecho su declaración anual, entonces va a tener que enmendar esa declaración para poder capturar el número correcto de salarios. Como lo mencioné antes, la cantidad del crédito tiene que ser restada de los salarios que usted reporte en su declaración federal para el 2020. Y entonces, ¿se pueden obtener los dos? Sí. Eso es un cambio que acaba de ocurrir este año y puede ser retroactivo. Lo único que se tiene que saber y que es demasiado importante es que los salarios que fueron pagados con los recursos del préstamo de PPP no califican para el ERC. Entonces, los salarios que se pagaron con el PPP no se pueden usar para ganar el crédito del ERC. También se deben excluir los salarios pagados bajo el programa de Families First Coronavirus Response Act. También se deben excluir si recibieron una ayuda del Paid Family and Medical Leave, y tampoco se puede reclamar el crédito si reclama el Work Opportunity Tax Credit. Esos son como créditos para compañías ya más grandes que tienen demasiados empleados. Para personas que tienen un negocio más pequeño, el que más aplica es el primero. Entonces, tenga en cuenta que si usted recibió el préstamo de PPP, no puede usar los salarios que se pagaron con el PPP para calificar para el ERC.
Ok, yo creo que antes de pasar a esta siguiente diapositiva, tenemos que preguntarles si tienen alguna duda respecto al material que Sandy les acaba de presentar. Si es así, por favor, háganlas llegar por medio del chat, o si gustan decirlas verbalmente, estamos listos.
Y cabe mencionar que esto es demasiada información, entonces al final de la presentación vamos a dejar nuestra información y también la información de uno de los contadores que tenemos, que es un experto en los dos, en el ERC y en el PPP, y él se ha básicamente ofrecido a responder preguntas que ustedes tengan. Ustedes van a ver su número de teléfono y su correo electrónico, también el de nosotros, si tienen algunas preguntas que por alguna razón después de irse de la presentación se le ocurren, para que ustedes se sientan con la libertad de mandarnos sus preguntas y nosotros con mucho gusto las responderemos.
No tenemos preguntas hasta ahora. En caso de que las tengan, nos las pueden hacer llegar y podemos regresarnos al tema del PPP y el ERC. El siguiente tema que queremos platicar con ustedes son unas 5 preguntas que recibimos de parte de ustedes o del grupo de maestro. La primera pregunta fue relacionado a tener gastos de diferentes negocios de los cuales usted es dueño. En caso de que sea su caso, la respuesta es sí. Si tiene diferentes negocios, que tiene diferentes actividades y diferentes ingresos y gastos, es muy importante mantenerlos separados. Es una regla que la IRS pide, más que nada porque lo que la IRS espera es que usted separe lo que viene siendo gastos personales y gastos de negocio. La siguiente pregunta es, ¿puedo deducir diferentes costos o gastos por los obsequios, por los regalos que le doy a mis clientes? La respuesta es sí. Sin embargo, hay que considerar que hay un límite de $25 por cliente por año. Muchas veces los regalos que le damos a nuestros clientes sobrepasan esa cantidad. Si es así, la cantidad que sobrepasa los $25 no será deducible de impuestos. Hay excepciones, como por ejemplo, si usted le llegara a obsequiar a un cliente algún tipo de material de mercadotecnia, como por ejemplo plumas, o le llegara a dar vasos o algo en que tengan su nombre impreso o grabado en ese producto, usted tiene la libertad de poder deducirlo al 100%. Otra pregunta que recibimos fue cuando dono cosas del hogar, ¿no? Muchas veces vamos a Goodwill o vamos a Salvation Army y dejamos ahí cosas. ¿Qué es lo que puedo deducir y cuánto? En teoría se puede deducir todo lo que usted vaya a dejar ahí y se lo acepten. Y la cantidad que usted puede deducir es de $500 sin tener que agregar una forma a su declaración. La regla que está viendo usted de 250 se refiere a donaciones que se hacen por medio de efectivos, ya sea un cheque o dinero en efectivo, y usted tiene la libertad de poder deducir 250 sin tener que justificarle al IRS para quién fue la cantidad. En caso de que sea más de 250, entonces es necesario que reciba una carta o reciba algún tipo de comprobante de esa empresa sin fines de lucro para que usted lo pueda deducir en su declaración. La otra pregunta es, uso mi sub, mi camioneta o mi pick-up para el negocio y esta persona nos comentó que se vencía su arrendamiento en noviembre. ¿Me conviene más volverlo a arrendar o mejor comprarlo para deducirlo al 100%? Aquí son diferentes preguntas. Es importante mencionar que para poder deducir un automóvil, o en este caso una camioneta al 100%, entra la regla de que el peso del automóvil tiene que ser de más de 6,000 libras. Si no, no es posible deducirlo al 100%. Entonces, la opción que tenemos es, ya sea deducir los costos actuales o los costos reales de ese vehículo o el millaje. Normalmente, el 90% de las veces cuando vemos esto, conviene muchísimo más tomar el millaje. En caso de que el millaje no sea tan conveniente como los gastos reales, se pueden tomar los gastos reales incluyendo gasolina, reparaciones, mantenimiento, inclusive si lo está arrendando, se puede deducir el costo, pero es muy importante mencionar que se debe utilizar por lo menos para el 50% del negocio. Si no, no es posible. La otra pregunta que recibimos fue, cuando llevo a mis clientes a comer y beben vino, ¿se puede deducir? Obviamente vino puede incluir, en este caso, vino puede ser cerveza o algún otro tipo de licor. La respuesta es sí. ¿Se puede deducir la propina? La respuesta es sí. Es importante mencionar que hay que tener cuidado porque muchas veces esa comida o ese evento con el cliente se convierte en algo relacionado al entretenimiento. El IRS dice que el entretenimiento es cero deducible de impuestos. Entonces es importante tomar eso a consideración. Esas fueron las 5 preguntas que recibimos. Estamos abiertos, dispuestos a responder cualquier otra pregunta que ustedes tengan. Como les comentamos, ya sea por medio del chat o por medio de voz, si lo quieren hacer. Independientemente de eso, es todo lo que tenemos nosotros para ustedes. Tengan la libertad de mandarnos un correo electrónico a nuestras direcciones que están ahí. También les recomendamos visitar nuestra página de internet, calvettiferguson.com, donde tenemos diferentes recursos. Pueden aprender más de nosotros, de cómo podemos ayudar, de cómo trabajamos. En Calvetti tratamos con muchísimos clientes de diferentes tamaños, formas y estamos dispuestos a servirles como ustedes lo necesiten. Nosotros nos encanta trabajar con personas emprendedoras, como es el caso de ustedes. Entonces, siéntanse con la libertad de mandarnos un correo o una llamada telefónica.
Ok, y Ricardo, ¿no tienes preguntas? So, con esto concluye el seminario de web. Tendremos esta presentación disponible en nuestro sitio web y también enviaremos el PowerPoint por correo electrónico. Gracias a Sandy y Diego por estar aquí con nosotros y con nuestra familia de maestro. Y gracias a ustedes por venir y que tengas un buen día. Gracias.
Gracias a ustedes por la invitación, Leslie, que estén muy bien. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Gracias.